Hello and welcome to the Real Talk podcast with Kelly and Avery. We're your hosts, Kelly Berger and Avery Roberts. We are two rare ladies living with congenital muscular dystrophy, CMD.
The show where we amplify voices, break down barriers, and celebrate the power of disability identity. Whether you're living with a disability, supporting someone who is, or just here to learn, you're in the right place.
Where wit, wisdom, and reels are all part of the party. So sit down with us. We're tearing down stereotypes, one reel at a time.
It's a front row seat to bold conversations and the thriving disabled lifestyle, and we're ready to get gloriously uncomfortable.
Let's get loud, proud, and empowered. Real power, real stories.
Today we've got a powerful episode lined up as we're discussing the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, how it changed the world and where we still need to go. And we're thrilled to welcome a guest who's a true force in the disability rights movement, Naomi Hess. Hi, Naomi. Do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your advocacy for real change in today's world?
Yeah, hi Avery and Kelly. Thank you so much for having me today. Super excited to join you. My name is Naomi, and I have a rare form of muscular dystrophy. So I use a wheelchair to get around, and I have for most of my life. So disability has always been inherently part of my identity. I'm super grateful to be working in the disability advocacy space. I currently work as a contracted editorial manager for the American Association of People with Disabilities. But while I'm on this podcast, I'm representing myself and not AAPD. I'm also a master's student in media advocacy at Northeastern University. So this program is all about how do you communicate about law and policy to affect social change. So I'm really passionate about using writing to further advocacy movements and specifically the disability justice movement. So that's kind of where I come from and what I'm excited to talk about today.
Awesome. Thanks, Naomi. It's so lovely to have you here. So for those of you that don't know, can you just give us a brief background of what is the ADA? What does it mean? Kind of just a brief rundown of that for those that aren't aware.
Yeah, so the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's a really groundbreaking piece of disability rights legislation that celebrated its 35th anniversary. The ADA was signed into law by President Bush on July 26, 1990. And there are all sorts of different provisions in this law that ensure equal access for people with disabilities in places of public accommodation, like businesses and restaurants and stores. There are also transportation provisions, education, really all facets of public life have historically excluded disabled people, and the ADA seeks to remedy that. It's not the first piece of disability legislation. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of, I believe, 1974 also expanded disability access by making sure that different parts of life that receive funding from the government have to be accessible to people with disabilities. But the ADA is more far-reaching because it also covers private entities that might not receive a lot of government funding. As someone who is newly 25 years old, I am very grateful to have grown up in the post-ADA world because while not everything is accessible to people like me who use wheelchairs or people with other sorts of mobility aids or other types of disabilities, we're certainly a lot better off than we were before 1990. It definitely took a lot of advocacy to get the ADA over the finish line. So many amazing activists were really at the front lines of fighting for justice, and I'm just so grateful to everyone who came before me.
Yeah, same here, and I'm sure, Kelly, you could say the same.
Yeah, imagining a world without it is just whew.
Yeah. But before we dive into the impact the ADA has had today, let's take a step back. So obviously you walked us through what life was like for people living with disabilities before the ADA. But so before the ADA, there was no universal accessibility in public spaces, no protection against discrimination, and few opportunities for employment. But for someone navigating that world, how did the disability rights movement, particularly the Section 504 sit-ins and the Capitol crawl, shape public awareness and policy? And like, how did the work there influence your work and passion today?
I think for too long, disabled people have been pushed to the margins of society. And I mean, there were actually laws in place, right? The ugly laws in the 1900s that kind of criminalized like being outside as someone who was different, who had a disability or any sort of disfigurement. And it took a lot of time throughout the 1900s for the general public to realize that disabled people were really a powerful, like, block, like a voting block, a political advocacy block, and just a group of people that really wanted their rights and were doing whatever it took to make the public listen. And a lot of that did come from direct action. So the Section 504 sit-ins in the late 1970s were focused on making sure that Section 504 was actually enacted, because for a long time throughout that decade, the laws were written, but they just weren't put into effect. So all throughout the country, disabled people organized sit-ins in the federal buildings for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare to make the department and the public like sit up and pay attention. A lot of the protests, the sit-ins, did not last that long, but the one in California, which was led by Judy Heumann and several other prominent activists, lasted close to a month and really gained a lot of traction. And it did successfully convince Joseph Califano, who was leading the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, to eventually actually care enough to put Section 504 into effect. And Section 504 was really transformative. I think one key example is in education, because Judy Heumann herself was like not really allowed to go to public schools because of her disability for part of her life. And Section 504 ensured that people with disabilities could have access to education. So building off of that, there were also direct actions involved in making sure that the ADA was passed. The Capitol crawl, which took place earlier in 1990, was when a large group of people with disabilities came to the U.S. Capitol, got out of their wheelchairs, got on the ground, and actually crawled up the steps of the U.S. Capitol to demonstrate, like, this is what we have to go through every day. We can't access buildings. Something must be done about it. And I think there were a lot of reporters and photographers, and just, I think especially the visual images must have been really, really shocking, I think, for a lot of the general public to see. And eventually, Congress got their act together in a bipartisan manner, which was also really impressive, and passed the ADA with a lot of support. And George Bush signed it 35 years ago. And while I'm certainly super grateful for the ADA, it's also kind of the floor, right? And not the ceiling when it comes to disability rights. Like, there's a lot that must be done to improve it. There was the ADA Amendments Act of 2008, which further expanded like the sorts of disabilities that the ADA covered and had some other provisions, but there haven't really been a lot of other significant movements or laws about disabilities since 2008. And actually, something that I'm really disappointed in is that for the last several years, almost every Congress has introduced a bill that would negatively impact the ADA and roll back some of the protections because of concerns from the business community. This has never actually passed, but just the fact that some members of Congress want to limit the ADA is really disappointing. And I think for me, knowing all this advocacy that came before I was ever born, it just puts me in the line of history of people who care about these issues and truly want to make the world a more accessible and inclusive place. So I'm really grateful to be working in this space and just trying to shine a light on all the other amazing advocates.
Let me ask you this, ladies. Picture yourself back at that moment where there was the Capitol crawl. Would you both participate in that if you were around during that time? Do you think you could see yourself doing that?
I think honestly, with my mobility, I don't see a way I could have. Like, I think,
Yeah.
right.
like, I think in an ideal world, but I don't see any way I could have gone up all those steps. I did actually, when I was younger, bump up like a couple steps in my house from time to time.
Yeah.
But that was when I had a little more strength, and um, I, yeah, I think it would have been very hard. So I give a lot of props to the people who were actually able physically to do it.
For
I
sure.
agree.
Yeah, I think just being there to support it. I think if I couldn't have done it, I would have been at the steps trying or attempting to support that because it really, like we said, is such a pivotal moment in the history of the ADA passing.
I want to kind of respond to what you said, something that you said, Naomi, of that technically the ADA is supposed to be like the bare minimum in a way. And we're supposed to go up from there. But I think something else that a lot of people don't realize is that the ADA only applies to really public spaces. So a lot of private spaces are completely inaccessible. I think another thing is that something that one of the reasons why people turn their back on making a space accessible is because of budgeting, and they think that it would be a burden. Um, and so that's kind of like what you were touching on as well, um, Naomi, and just the enforcement gaps there. But for many, those those moments that now we're looking back on like, oh my god, would we do that? It was a turning point, and those movements shaped the push for the ADA. So who were some of the key figures in the fight for disability rights? Like Judy Human, I see that you have a picture on your wall behind you. The mother of the
Yes, Queen
disability
Judy,
rights
Queen,
movement.
yes.
May she rest in peace. Ed Roberts and Justin Dart, and what role did they play? And like kind of connecting it to your own advocacy work, and your own journey, how do they still influence your work and passion?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely named some of the most important people in our movement. And I think there's just so many others who might not get the naming attention that they deserve. And unfortunately, I can't even think of all the people who I'm referencing. I think, first of all, I'm not in the same sentence as them by any means. Like, they were kind of the public faces of the disability rights movement. And they were willing to organize all these direct actions. And honestly, I didn't even learn about them until, honestly, when I was in college, especially when I did the APD internship myself, was when I first started to learn a lot more about disability history. I think this just isn't taught much in schools, right? And that's a shame. And I definitely hope that's something that changes because all disabled people deserve to know what it took for us to get our rights. But in terms of how they've inspired me in the good sense and not the inspiration porn sense, I think they've just shown that like someone with like the determination to affect change can actually do it. And certainly they can't do it alone, right? Like they were part of a movement. And that's just really amazing for me to see that when people with disabilities band together, when they're passionate and determined, that's how kind of the change happens. And I am working for an organization that is devoted to that. I have created change on smaller scales, I would say, like on my campus community when I was at Princeton University, I was able to work with other students with disabilities to really make the campus a more accessible and inclusive space. And I'm just committed to continuing that work beyond Princeton in the greater country.
Yeah, it's incredible to see how grassroots activism really changes the tide, and we need to continue to raise our voices in that way. And I think that it just shows that it's not just about accessibility, it's also about shifting societal perceptions. So, Kelly, you want to fast forward to July 26, 1990?
Yeah, for sure. I know I wanted to read off a quote here from George H.W. Bush, who said, "Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." That was one of his iconic quotes that within the signing of that. Do you think that the walls are finally down? Is that the same moment? Do we see that today, that we're not excluded? Or do you think that how do you feel that statement lives up?
I think that was certainly the intent of the ADA, and it was the best that could be passed at that current time. I don't know if it made the walls crumble. I think they made the walls shrink. Like, I definitely think it addressed a lot of the barriers in the built world that disabled people were facing and continuing to face. But as you mentioned, there's still a lot of attitudinal barriers. This is just people having outdated and untrue perceptions about what disabled people are capable of. And no piece of legislation is really going to be able to address that. I do think teaching disability history, as I just talked about, would help if people without disabilities could learn more about the movement. But I think this is just something that is not really a political thing that needs to be addressed. It's just direct interpersonal issues, right? Like, I think as disabled people are more integrated into the world post ADA, this does help with some of the attitudinal barriers for sure. I think that's part of the wall that's still partially up. As you mentioned, the enforcement mechanisms for the ADA are not entirely sufficient. For example, if people are trying to enter a place of public accommodation, store, a restaurant, etc., really the only options that they face in an accessible building are to file a complaint with the Department of Justice or file a lawsuit. Especially right now when the Civil Rights Division of DOJ has kind of been decimated, I don't really know where the complaints are going. And I don't know, not every person has the time, the money, the energy to file a full lawsuit. No part of the government is actually doing proactive enforcement to make sure that buildings are accessible. And that's something that I would love to see change in an ideal world, like doing more on the proactive side before disabled people have issues accessing a space. Also, even though the ADA was passed 35 years ago, like a lot of like transportation still isn't accessible, right? Like, Avery, I know you live in New York City, and like the subway is a disaster for
Don't
people
even
with
get me
disabilities,
started.
right?
Yeah.
As a frequent New York visitor, I've experienced this. Well, the MTA just had that settlement with Department of Justice a couple years ago about adding elevator access to the subway system. But the ADA has been around for 35 years. Why didn't the MTA do more? Why did it take this massive settlement to actually put a proactive plan into place to address the inequities in the public transportation system? So that's why I say like the walls are still up. Like, I think a lot of businesses just haven't done enough. A lot of businesses might think because they're pre-1990 that they don't have to do anything. I think that's a grandfathered in, but that isn't the case. They just haven't been the subjects of a complaint or a lawsuit. So I think education, both about the disability rights movement and also what the ADA actually requires, could be some of the next steps that I would like to see in terms of really fulfilling the promises of the ADA.
Preach. Could not.
Yes, beautifully said. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it
Yeah.
really all stems from education and, like you mentioned, societal barriers, just getting people to understand and realize the struggles to just make it a wider known issue that hopefully one day it won't be an issue, you know?
Right.
We can only dream, right?
Yeah.
So that was then, and now we're in the here and now. What tangible improvements have we seen since the ADA's passage? Things like curb cuts, accessible public transportation, sort of, like you were saying, and workplace accommodations all come to mind. But there are still some major areas where the ADA falls short, like we're saying. I feel like that's a common theme on this episode. Can you, and that we've all experienced just as all power chair users ourselves, bring the lived experience into it and just the power of the collective. Can you share some real world examples of how the ADA has impacted the lives of those living with disabilities and where we still need work, especially in areas like digital accessibility, right?
Yeah. So obviously the ADA has made tangible differences. Any building that's been built since 1990 really has to fulfill the expectations of the ADA to be fully accessible to people with disabilities. Workplace accommodations are essential in making sure that disabled people can actually be part of the workforce. But unfortunately, the statistics for disability employment are still really low, better than they were pre-ADA, right? But compared to the population without disabilities, like it's a really low stat. And the disability employment statistics definitely improved during COVID with the advent or the expansion of telework. But we're now seeing telework being rolled back, and that's a problem. And I think that deserves its own attention. This telework can really help a lot of disabled people work. Yeah, so public transit is definitely better, not perfect. I'm very lucky to be in DC, where every metro station does have an elevator, but that's an exception compared to other systems I've tried, like New York and Boston, where there are still some stations without elevators. And yeah, I think the ADA really did help raise awareness of the issues that we're facing. But it has been a long time. When the ADA was passed, the internet wasn't as big of a omnipresent feature of life. And like people with disabilities have all sorts of different needs for technology, right? People have screen readers, or they have other ways of using their technology to meet the needs of their mobility or their vision or their hearing. So it's super important for any future disability legislation to address this, because we all deserve access to the internet as much as we deserve access to public spaces.
Absolutely, for sure. So we talked about some things that we've seen improved. I would just love to know too, with you two ladies, what is something in the wild that you have experienced that is a really cool upgrade in accessibility in general? Like, is there a cool, I know for me, like I had one really cool door opener that was like, I kick it with my foot plate and it would just, yeah, or you could wave if you couldn't move your hands up all the way. So what's one piece of accessibility out in the wild that you've experienced that just kind of blew your mind, or that you felt like seeing that this was for me, finally?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely really like the wave buttons. Kind of having trouble identifying anything in particular, just because I feel like there's either not a bad button or there isn't. Like I haven't seen a lot of other innovation. So yeah, I don't know if I have a expanded answer for that.
I feel like I agree with you, Kelly. I'll never forget. I was in LA, so this is like other side of the country, like in LA, and I noticed at our hotel there was a button like near the floor, like towards the ground. And I always wondered like what purpose does that have? Like why is that there? Whatever. And then I realized, oh, hopefully the motive is so that we can kick it with our foot, or even like our foot plates too. And it like completely blew my mind. And now I wish every place had it, just because I think then we all wouldn't have to touch the same button with our hands, because, germs and everything. And then we could just kick it. And I feel like also when we're trying to hit a button, depending on what your mobility is, and your strength, like you have to really make sure that you're like lined up perfectly. Like you have to, it's a whole thing just to hit a freaking button. And so, I think all in all, that would make life so much easier. Or, perfect world situation, we could just make every door like an automatic door. Like when you're going into a store, you walk up to it and it just opens. Like that would seriously be a perfect world situation. But that's such a good question, Kelly.
But what about like, okay, you can get into the building, but what about once you're in there, right? Like I've encountered so many like bathrooms that may have the door opening the wrong way, and then there isn't space for my wheelchair, or it's supposed to have a grab bar and it doesn't, or the sink doesn't allow my wheelchair to fit under. All of this is like supposed to be part of like the plans to build buildings now post ADA, but it's just not always the case.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've always said is it's an afterthought, right? Like they build it and we're there, but oh wait, our wheelchair can't fit there, or you can't fit under it, like under the sink, under wherever it is. And it's always like we're an afterthought. And it would be nice if we were, the before, if we were part of the initial discussion instead of always being having to amend things afterwards to fix what's
Yeah,
problematic.
yeah. That's universal design really should be the norm.
Agreed.
Period. I love that. So, for our listeners, Naomi, especially younger advocates, how has the ADA influenced our activism today? Can you talk about the role youth-led movements had in pushing the ADA and still pushing the ADA into new spaces like social media and digital advocacy?
Yeah, I think social media has definitely helped in the 21st century disability rights movement. I also think it's just easier to get people gathered and motivated to work together. Like, for instance, think about some of the attempted repeals of the Affordable Care Act when disabled people would come to the Capitol, probably largely connected via social media, and refused to leave, and really show the collective power of the disability organization, because of how the ACA has really granted disabled people so many rights in healthcare, right? Like the making sure that we can't be denied because of pre-existing conditions. And so, similar to how, like, I think the images of the Capitol crawl were really powerful. Some of the images of photographs of disabled people at the ACA protests were also super striking, because this is the population that it really impacts. People with disabilities. So seeing that the disability movement was united to combat these awful attacks was really impactful for me when I think I was in high school during a lot of those protests. So yeah, I think, like all social justice movements, like it's really about collective organizing, because like we're stronger together.
It's beautifully summed up for sure. And how do you see, I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what is the future of access? What do you see? Do you see AI as part of helping us bridge that gap a little bit? Or kind of what do you see as the future of access?
Yeah, I think, as we talked about, digital accessibility is kind of well, it's not that new of a frontier anymore, but it's a frontier that needs to be focused on more. I think a lot, unfortunately, of what the disability movements are focusing on right now is preventing rollback, right? I feel like because of the current political environment, it's a lot of protecting what we have instead of trying to push things forward, which is really sad. But it's just, I think, kind of the reality of, the attacks on DEI and the attacks on the Affordable Care Act that are still happening, you know, like almost 20 years later. So I think the disability organizations and like all sorts of advocates are really trying to show that what we have is so important in making sure that disabled people can live their lives, our lives. I'm thinking of the recent protests around the budget reconciliation bill, which unfortunately were not successful because the bill passed, and it rips away Medicaid from so many people. And it will also force rural hospital closures. It cuts on SPAC, SNAP, no supplemental nutrition, food access, and all these sort of public benefit programs that disabled people really rely on are just threatened. So it's hard for me to envision in the next couple of years advancements in disability rights, because we're just so focused on making sure that our rights aren't rolled back.
Yeah, and I think that we really need to continue to advocate for policy changes to ensure that we are not rolling back more than we are currently. That would
Roll
help
forward. We need to
bridge.
roll forward,
Yes, roll forward, people.
not roll
Um,
back, people.
no, that would really help bridge the gap between physical and digital accessibility. And I think that we just really need to modernize the ADA and ensure that it's fully enforced. Um, And I think that a lot of people don't realize the importance of allyship and how it's critical for non-disabled and able-bodied people to support um, and push for change alongside us. What role do you think allies and the wider community can play in pushing for stronger rights and access?
Yeah, I mean, allies have always been so important to the disability movement. Like, I think about the Section 504 protests and how the Black Panthers helped provide food while the disabled people were, holed up in the health, education, and welfare building for 20 something days. So also a lot of disability pride has kind of been in line with LGBT pride too, like coming to terms with our identities that have for so long been kind of marginalized. And I think today, with a lot of the attacks on Medicaid and the ACA, there have been a lot of other movements that have supported our advocacy, like care worker organizations, like domestic care worker organizations, like reproductive health organizations. All of our issues are intertwined. And it's really great to see like the greater social justice movements starting to come to terms that disability is inherently part of the fight.
And so, if people are listening and they want to dive deeper on the ADA and learn more, whether they're allies, whether they're disabled, whatever they identify with, where would you suggest they go, or what kind of resources where would you start with to kind of
Yeah, I
learn?
mean, I think the first one that comes to mind is the documentary Crip Camp, which is on Netflix, and I at least used to be on Netflix's YouTube as well for free access. This was honestly one of the first pieces of media that really taught me about the disability rights movement, and that was only, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. So that is just a groundbreaking documentary that really showcases the history of the disability movement and what comes next. Avery and I just recently watched this new documentary on PBS. Avery, do you remember the full names? I know it was kind of a long name.
Oh, the full name? I just know Change Not Charity.
Yes, that's it. I'm like, I couldn't remember the exact phrase. Yeah, Change That Charity is a documentary that recently came out on PBS that I think also does a really great job at teaching about the history of disability rights. Um, Also, there's a new documentary, Deaf President Now, on Apple. Another piece of the really important disability advocacy is the protest at Gallaudet University, the Deaf University, which is in DC, because there had never been a deaf president for a deaf university, and eventually students got fed up and decided to do something about it. And this was actually right before the ADA was passed. From what I've heard from the PBS documentary, Congress started paying more attention to the ADA because they saw how much the public had rallied around the protest at Gallaudet. And like, this just showed that disabled people can, made stuff happen when they band together. So I think those are 3 documentaries. In terms of literature, I love anything that Alice Wong compiles. Disability Visibility is a really awesome anthology where different disabled people wrote about their identities. And it really cuts across disability in a really good way. Like people of all sorts of different backgrounds, races, sexualities, disabilities are part of this collection. And I think it just really shows the diversity of the disability community. So that's probably my number 1 book, especially if someone isn't as knowledgeable about disability.
These are all great resources, and we'll be sure to include them in the show notes along with other ones like ada.gov, the AAPD website, disability rights education, and what is it? Defense Fund.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then, like you mentioned, Crip Camp, which is an incredible documentary on Netflix, and Judy Human's book Being Human, that's being changed into a movie as we speak. They're filming right now, so watch out for that. And yeah, like you mentioned, Deaf President Now literally recently was nominated for an Emmy. And so that is so good to see, and it's so empowering to know that we're finally being recognized in that way. So Naomi, thank you so much for being here with us today,
Yes, we
and
love
sharing
chatting.
your insight. It's clear that while we've made strides. The work is far from over, and we're just so grateful for all the work that you've done. And I would just encourage our listeners to continue to raise our voices. There is, a way for you to meet with your legislators specifically, just because we've learned the power of the lived experience. And so we need to get into those rooms and, show the power of numbers and share our needs and how we can connect that to public policy. So if you haven't done so already, please check out the EverLife Foundation for Rare Diseases and the Rare Disease Legislative Advocates that have a bunch of different resources connected to rare disease advocacy, as well as an opportunity for you to participate in Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill. But looking at your own journey, Naomi, the stories you've shared today, and the future of disability rights, how do you see your willpower driving change, and what do you hope others will take away from your experiences? So what's been your willpower?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, like I'm super grateful to be part of the ADA generation, right? Like the post-ADA disability community, and I've just met so many amazing advocates, like in my generation who have never known what it's like to grow up pre-ADA, and we are determined to never go back to a world like that. So I find so much strength and solidarity with the other disabled people around my age who I've met through my time in the APD internship or different summer camps that I've done, like the MDA camp. I am truly grateful for the community. And I think in terms of my willpower, I think my educational background, kind of at the intersection of policy and communications will hopefully set me up well to continue to be part of this movement. And just, I really love working in the disability advocacy space, partially because all my coworkers are disabled and amazing, but also like as someone who has benefited from the ADA and every other piece of legislation, I just feel this sort of calling to try to make things better. And I'm so glad to have met both of you because I know that you're along for this ride as well.
Of course.
Yes,
Same
beautifully
here.
said, Naomi. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this inclusive space where disability radiates and every listen helps amplify disabled voices that deserve to be heard. We're so grateful you're on this journey with us.
We share real stories, honest conversations, and expert insights that challenge misconceptions. Because disability doesn't define us, it's just a different way of experiencing the world.
Your support keeps this beautifully disabled, slightly chaotic show rolling.
You are truly the real MVPs. We have power, real stories.